I dyed my hair blue so my boss would stop blaming me for the hairs found in customers' food. I worked at a family restaurant called Mel's Kitchen, where the owner, Raul, was absolutely convinced that every hair found in the food was mine. It didn't matter that we had 8 other employees with brown hair just like mine, right? According to Raul, I was the one shedding hair. The first time it happened, a lady found a long brown hair in her pancakes. Raul immediately approached me in front of the entire kitchen and said, "Lucia, you need to wear a hairnet or you're fired." I thought, fine, whatever. So I started wearing the ridiculous hairnet every shift, but it kept happening. Every time someone complained about hair in their food, Raul pointed at me and threatened to dock my pay. I kept telling him it wasn't me because, well, I was wearing a hairnet, but he just shook his head and said I was being careless. The other waiters started looking at me strangely, as if I were some kind of health code violator. The breaking point came on a busy Saturday morning. A businessman ordered eggs Benedict and found not one but 3 brown hairs tangled in his hollandaise sauce. He was furious and threatened to call the health department. Raul stormed into the kitchen, red-faced and sweaty, and yelled at me in front of everyone, "Lucia, that's it. One more hair complaint and you're out." I was so frustrated I almost cried right there. I knew for a fact those hairs weren't mine because my hair was tied up in a tight bun under that stupid hairnet, but Raul wouldn't listen. That's when I noticed something that filled me with rage. Esperanza, one of the cooks, was standing right behind the grill with her long brown hair completely loose, not even in a ponytail. No hair protection whatsoever. But here's the kicker. Raul didn't say a word to her because she was his niece. That night I went to CVS and bought the brightest blue hair dye I could find, electric blue, the kind that screams, "Look at me," from across the room. I dyed my entire head in my tiny apartment bathroom, leaving blue stains all over the sink and probably on my security deposit. On Monday morning, I showed up to work looking like a punk. Raul gave me a weird look but didn't say anything. I put on my hairnet as usual and got to work. Around lunchtime, an elderly couple ordered the meatloaf special. 10 minutes later, they called me over and there it was, a long brown hair on top of their mashed potatoes. I looked at it and my heart raced, not out of nervousness but pure adrenaline, the kind you feel when you finally have the proof you've been waiting for. For the first time since dyeing my hair blue, I had concrete, irrefutable evidence that it was never my hair in the food. I looked at the elderly couple waiting for a resolution. The wife looked disgusted, pushing the plate aside. The husband shook his head, clearly disappointed. Normally, I'd discreetly call Raul, he'd come to the table, humiliate me in front of the customers, and I'd swallow it yet again. But today was different. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. I carefully picked up the plate, treating it like precious crime scene evidence because that's exactly what it was, proof of my innocence and the systemic hypocrisy I'd been enduring. I walked slowly to the counter where Raul was reviewing orders. I noticed the other employees sensing something different in my demeanor. Dolores, the veteran waitress, looked at me curiously. Miguel, the cook, lifted his head from the grill. And Esperanza, she was there, working at the griddle with her loose brown hair swinging freely, completely carefree about hygiene. She didn't even realize what was about to happen. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. Months of public humiliation, months of being treated like a problem employee, months of having my competence questioned for something I never did. It was all about to end. I stopped right in the middle of the dining room where every customer could see and hear me. The restaurant was packed for Monday lunch. Perfect. More witnesses. "Raul," I called out, my voice calm but loud enough for half the customers to hear. "I need you to come here and address another one of my hair in the food problems." He approached with his usual arrogant confidence, already preparing his standard lecture. I could see in his eyes he was ready for another public humiliation of Lucia, the irresponsible one. "Let me guess," he said loudly for the customers to hear. "You forgot to tie your hair properly again." That's when I made the move that would change everything. Dramatically, with slow and deliberate gestures, I took off my hairnet. My electric blue hair cascaded over my shoulders like a wave of rebellion. The silence that followed was deafening. Raul's jaw literally dropped. Some customers dropped their forks. Even the background music seemed to stop. I pointed to the brown hair on the plate, locking eyes with Raul. "Explain to me how my brown hair ended up in this food, Raul." His face went from red to white in seconds. He opened and closed his mouth several times like a fish out of water. The customers started murmuring among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record the unfolding drama. "I'm waiting," I continued, keeping my voice calm but firm. "How did my blue hair turn brown on this plate?" That's when Esperanza finally realized what was happening. She looked at me, then at Raul, then at her own loose hair, and in a desperate attempt to go unnoticed, she started scrambling for a hairnet. But it was too late. "Are you all seeing this?" I announced to the entire restaurant, turning to show my blue hair to every customer. "For months, I've been blamed for something I never did. Now you're all witnesses to the truth." Raul was still stammering, trying to come up with an explanation. "Well, maybe it's from before when I still what, Raul?" I interrupted. When my hair was still brown, that was 3 weeks ago. Are you saying a hair was wandering around the kitchen for 3 weeks before landing on this couple's plate? The customers' murmurs grew louder. Some laughed, others expressed outrage. I was winning the crowd. I pulled out my phone and started recording everything. People, you won't believe what I'm about to show you. I began a live stream on Instagram. My name is Lucia, and for months I've been publicly humiliated by my boss, who blamed me for every hair found in customers' food. I showed my blue hair to the camera, then the brown hair on the plate, and then Raul, still completely lost. This is Raul, my boss, who still hasn't explained how my blue hair turned brown on this plate. The views started climbing rapidly. Supportive comments flooded in. Go Lucia, expose the abusive boss. Justice for the blue-haired girl. Customers started getting up and leaving without paying. Some expressed disgust at the sanitary conditions. One woman said loudly, if they don't even know where the hair in the food comes from, imagine what else could be wrong here. And this, I continued, turning the camera toward Esperanza, who was trying to hide behind the griddle. Is Esperanza, Raul's niece, who's been working without a hairnet for months while I was humiliated daily. The video was already getting hundreds of views, and the comments kept pouring in. Hashtags started appearing. Blue hair justice, justice for Lucia, toxic restaurant. Raul finally tried to take control of the situation. Lucia, stop this now or you're fired. I laughed. Literally laughed in his face. Fire me, Raul. You just lost half your customers. Look around. And it was true, the restaurant was emptying out. People were quickly paying their bills and leaving. Some didn't even bother to pay. Besides, I continued, still recording, do you really want to fire me in front of thousands of people watching live? Because that would be a great way to make this situation even worse for you. Dolores, the veteran waitress, approached me. Lucia, can I say something? She looked at the camera. I've worked here for 5 years, and I always knew those hairs were Lucia, but Raul never wanted to listen. Miguel, the cook, joined us too. It's true. Raul forbade me from complaining about Esperanza's practices. He said if I kept bothering her, I'd be fired. The revolt was spreading. Other employees started coming forward, each with their own stories of abuse and favoritism. What started as my personal revenge was turning into a full-blown exposé of the restaurant's abusive practices. Raul realized he was losing control. You're all fired, he shouted. All of you? Perfect, I replied, because then you can explain to your remaining customers, if there are any left, how you're going to run this restaurant without employees. The video kept gaining traction. Local influencers started sharing it. City food critics expressed horror in the comments. Local media began sending messages requesting interviews. In less than an hour, I'd gone from humiliated employee to local celebrity. And Raul was discovering that his actions had consequences he never imagined could come from someone he considered insignificant. That was just the beginning. What he didn't know was that a local investigative journalist was among the live stream's viewers, and she was very interested in learning more about Mel's Kitchen's labor practices. 2 hours later, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages of support poured in by the thousands. People shared their own stories of abusive bosses. The video had gone viral, not just locally, but nationally. Rebecca from Kaku News was the first journalist to call me. Lucia, I saw your live stream. I'd like to do a deeper report on what you experienced at the restaurant. Can I meet you? I agreed immediately. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every employee suffering silent abuse every day. We met at a cafe near my house. Rebecca had the serious air of an investigative journalist, but also a genuine kindness that made me feel comfortable sharing everything. Tell me about the pattern of behavior, she said, recording our conversation. Was it always like this with the other employees? Always, I replied, but it was worse with me because I pushed back. Raul hated when I tried to defend myself. There were days when he humiliated me in front of customers just to show who was in charge. I showed her months of documentation I'd kept, text messages where Raul threatened to dock my pay, photos of me coming home crying after particularly tough days, even some audio recordings I discreetly made during his humiliations. Did you know this could bring legal trouble for him? Rebecca asked, reviewing my notes. I suspected, but I didn't know what to do. I needed the job, you know. Or I did, now I don't even know if I still have one. Rebecca laughed. From what I saw in the video, I think that's the least of your worries. She told me she'd already interviewed 3 former Mel's Kitchen employees who confirmed the pattern of abuse. They all had similar stories: favoritism toward Esperanza, public humiliation for anyone who questioned anything, and constant threats of firing. There's more, she said. I got an anonymous tip that the restaurant has serious issues with health inspections. Apparently, it's not just about the hair. My stomach churned. What kind of issues? Improper food storage temperatures, falsified cleaning logs, safety equipment in terrible condition. The person who contacted me says Raul instructed employees to lie during inspections. That made me recall several odd situations I'd witnessed, times when Raul hurriedly cleaned the kitchen area when someone from outside showed up, times when he asked me to store certain things in the freezer, just for today. I can give you more details on that, I said. I documented some things that seemed strange, but I didn't realize they were that serious. Rebecca smiled. Lucia, you may not realize it, but you've built a solid case against your former boss. This goes far beyond a viral video. The next day, the report aired. It was a 15-minute investigation into abusive practices in family restaurants, using Mel's Kitchen as a case study. It included testimonies from former employees, analysis from labor law experts, and even an interview with a health inspector explaining the risks of the practices I'd documented. Raul tried to do damage control with a disastrous interview where he called it all a misunderstanding and said I was a problematic employee who distorted the situation, but the evidence was overwhelming. The public reaction was incredible. People canceled reservations, suppliers dropped contracts, and even the mall where the restaurant was located issued a statement saying they were evaluating the situation. Esperanza also tried to defend herself on social media with a tearful video saying she never meant to harm anyone, but the comments were brutal. People weren't interested in apologies, they wanted accountability. That's when I got the call that would change everything. Dr. Patricia, a labor law attorney, had seen the report and wanted to talk. Lucia, you have a very strong case for workplace harassment, discrimination, and creating a hostile work environment, she said during our consultation. With the evidence you have, especially the recordings and your colleagues' testimonies, this could be a landmark case. Landmark how? I asked. The kind that changes legislation, the kind that makes other employers think twice before treating employees the way Raul treated you. That same week we filed the lawsuit. The response was immediate. Labor rights organizations reached out offering support. Universities wanted to study the case. Even politicians started using my story in speeches about labor law reform. Raul, desperate, tried calling me several times, leaving voicemails begging to settle without lawyers. But I wasn't interested in negotiations. The pressure on him intensified when the health department conducted a surprise inspection. They found exactly what Rebecca had reported: multiple violations, falsified logs, and Esperanza working without protective equipment. The restaurant was temporarily shut down, and the fines were hefty. Raul couldn't explain to the inspectors why only I was required to wear protective gear while other employees, especially Esperanza, had different rules. Mel's Kitchen became synonymous with mismanagement and labor abuse. Memes were created. Business students used the case as an example of what not to do. The restaurant, once a neighborhood staple, was now a symbol of everything wrong with how small businesses treat employees. But for me, the greatest satisfaction came when I received a message from a young woman in another city. Lucia, I saw your story and decided to report my boss, who does similar things. Thank you for giving me courage. That's what it was always about, not revenge, but dignity. It was about showing that people like Raul can't keep abusing employees just because they think they can. 6 months later, I was in court. The atmosphere was solemn, unlike the chaos of that day at the restaurant. Raul sat at the defense table, visibly defeated. He was no longer the arrogant man who humiliated me publicly. Dr. Patricia presented our case meticulously. The viral recordings, colleagues' testimonies, media coverage, it all painted a clear picture of systematic abuse. Your Honor, she said, this isn't just a workplace dispute. It's about how a toxic work environment can devastate a person's life and how small businesses can exploit vulnerable employees. Raul's defense tried to argue it was a misunderstanding and that my reaction was disproportionate. But when my lawyer presented the evidence, months of documentation, multiple employee testimonies, and even the health inspection report, there was no denying the pattern of abuse. The judge was direct. Mr. Raul, your actions constitute systematic workplace harassment. Intentionally creating a hostile work environment for a specific employee is unacceptable in any business context. I won the lawsuit. The compensation was substantial, enough to cover not only material damages, but also, and especially, emotional damages. The judge specifically cited the case as an example of how seemingly small behaviors can have devastating impacts on employees' lives. Raul was forced to sell his house to pay the compensation and health department fines. The restaurant never reopened. Esperanza found a job elsewhere, but her reputation was also tarnished by her association with the case. But the legal victory was only part of the story. What really mattered was what I did with it. I used part of the compensation to fulfill a dream I didn't even know I had, starting my own business. Blue Hair Snacks began as a simple food truck but became an instant hit. It wasn't just because I'd become famous, though that helped. It was because I genuinely cared about every detail. Every employee was treated with respect. Every customer received not just good food, but an environment where they felt welcome. I hired Dolores, Miguel, and other former Mel's Kitchen employees. We created a workplace where no one was afraid to speak up, where everyone wore the same protective gear, where there was no favoritism. I never thought working could feel like this, Dolers told me one day as we cleaned the food truck at the end of a shift. No fear, no constant tension. The food truck became more than a business, it became a symbol. People came not just for the food, but for what we represented. Employees from other restaurants stopped by to share their own stories of abuse and ask for advice. I started giving talks on labor rights at culinary and business schools. I always began by telling my story, showing how a seemingly simple issue, hair in food, could hide years of systematic abuse. Dignity in the workplace isn't a luxury, I told audiences. It's a basic right, and when that right is violated, we have to have the courage to stand up for ourselves. Universities began using my case as a study, not just on labor rights, but on how social media can be used to expose injustices and create real change. A year after the legal victory, I received an email that brought me to tears. It was from a young woman named Paloma, who worked at a restaurant in another state. Lucia, my boss, did similar things to me, blaming me for problems that weren't mine, humiliating me in front of customers. After seeing your story, I recorded some incidents and sued him too. I won. I wanted to thank you for giving me the courage to not accept that treatment. Attached to the email was a photo, Paloma smiling in front of her own food truck, with a big sticker on the side that read, "Inspired by blue-haired Lucia." That was the real victory, not the money or the fleeting fame, but knowing my story had inspired others to refuse abusive treatment. I went back to where Mel's Kitchen used to be a few times. It was now a successful clothing store. The new owner, a lovely woman named Esperanza, not that Esperanza, put up a small plaque. Here, the blue hair revolution was born. Lucia, thank you for teaching us about dignity in the workplace. I heard through the grapevine that Raul was working as a waiter in a nearby city. Someone said he'd changed, that he treated his colleagues with respect. Part of me was glad for that. I never wanted to destroy his life. I just wanted him to understand that his actions had consequences. Esperanza, the niece, also learned some lessons. She came to me one day, almost 2 years after everything happened. She showed up at the food truck and asked to talk. Lucia, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness after all this time, she said, her eyes full of tears. But I need to tell you it was my fault. I knew those hairs were mine, but I let them blame you because it was easier. I could have been cruel. I could have said things to hurt her, but I realized holding onto anger wouldn't get me anywhere. Esperanza, what matters is that you learned, and that this never happens to anyone else. She nodded and walked away. I never saw her again, but I heard she became an advocate for workers' rights at the company where she worked. 5 years later, Blue Hair Snacks had grown into a small chain of food trucks. I still dyed my hair blue. It had become my trademark, but also a symbol of resistance and dignity. I received an award from the local Chamber of Commerce for social entrepreneurship. In my acceptance speech, I talked about how a situation of abuse had turned into an opportunity for growth. Sometimes, the worst experiences prepare us for the best opportunities, I told the audience. Don't let anyone diminish you. Don't accept abusive treatment. And remember, sometimes all it takes is the courage to show who you really are. I ended the speech by taking out my hair tie and letting my blue locks fall over my shoulders. The audience erupted in applause. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She had pink hair and determined eyes. Lucia, my name is Camilla. I work at a company where my boss treats me badly. After hearing your story, I've decided I'm not going to take it anymore. I smiled and handed her my card. Anything you need, call me. No one deserves to be treated the way I was. She squeezed my hand and said, "Thank you for teaching us we can be stronger than we think." That night, as I went home, I thought about how surprising life can be. 6 years ago, I was a scared employee who accepted humiliation because I needed the job. Today, I was a respected entrepreneur using my platform to advocate for others. It all started with a simple decision, dyeing my hair blue. But it was so much more than that. It was deciding I deserved to be treated with dignity. It was choosing to fight for myself when no one else would. And if I could go back in time and talk to that scared Lucia in her apartment bathroom, mixing blue dye, I'd tell her, do it, dye that hair.